to drift with every passion till my soul is a stringed lute on which all winds can play. Is it for this that I have given away mine ancient wisdom and austere control? Methinks my life is a twice-written scroll, scrawled over on some boyish holiday with idle songs for pipe and virelay which do but mar the secret of the whole. Surely there was a time I might have trod the sunlit heights, and from life's dissonance struck one clear chord to reach the ears of God. Is that time dead? Lo, with a little rod I did but touch the honey of romance, and must I lose a soul's inheritance? For a long time before that poem had appeared in print, its author's name was providing the English public with a topic for conversation very far removed from its normal subject, at once so classic and so cozy, of the weather and the royal family. There goes that bloody fool Oscar Wilde, a gentleman in the street had audibly remarked as he passed the poet by, and the poet turned to his companion and said, "It's quite extraordinary how quickly one becomes known in London." His appearance at this time was, of course, striking. We can picture the tall, amply built young man with that powerful, indolent, Babylonian sort of face he had, with its drooping crown of long, dim hair, into which, at some moment of depression, possibly the iron had entered. Often he would be wearing knee breeches, a velvet coat, a floating tie of greenish brocaded satin, and in his pale, pointed hand there would be a lily, sometimes even a sunflower. Well, now he was bound to attract attention. And this, of course, made him exquisitely happy. To have passed unnoticed anywhere in the world would have seemed to him the most ostentatious form of obscurity. As he himself said in later years, "I have no wish to pose as being ordinary, great heavens." Indeed, the only ordinary thing that Oscar Wilde seems to have done in those early years was to have fled from his native Ireland as soon as he possibly could. He wanted something, of course, that his own country could never have given him. He wanted, for one thing, to be widely talked about. Now, Dublin doubtless would have talked about him too, had indeed done so already. He had seen to that. But in Dublin, then as now, talk was mainly for talk's sake. There would have been no real result of the talk at all, you know. No largesse, no rich reward, no jeweled elegance. And the dinner table she so rightly felt himself destined to dominate would have been in Dublin at once less opulent than those in London, and far more conversationally competitive. An English lady, once gently rebuking the poet for his faith in a fortune-teller, had said, "Fortune-telling, Mr. Wilde, fortune-telling, oh, but don't you feel that sort of thing is rather tempting Providence?" And he had answered, "Dear lady, surely Providence can resist temptation by this time." Now, who in his own Ireland would ever have listened to a crack like that without trying either to cap or to capsize it? Oh, no. England was clearly the place for him. And to England he went, and having emerged encrusted with honours from Oxford, he proceeded to London, where he found time to amuse himself and the town prodigiously, and also to fall in love with the beautiful Lily Langtry, who allowed him to worship her through a whole summer and then advised him not to waste his time. Well, I don't think he was wasting his time, really, for he left some very charming poems in celebration of her great beauty, and to one of these poems he gave no title at all. He dedicated it simply to L.L., the initials, of course, of his beloved. I remember we used to meet by an ivied seat, and you warbled each pretty word with the air of a bird, and your voice had a quaver in it, just like a linnet, and shook as the blackbird's throat with its last big note, and your eyes. They were green and grey like an April day, but lit into amethyst when I stooped and kissed, and your mouth. It would never smile for a long, long while, then it rippled all over with laughter 5 minutes after. You were always afraid of a shower, just like a flower. I remember you started and ran when the rain began. I remember so well the room, and the lilac bloom that beat on the dripping pane in the warm June rain, and the color of your gown. It was amber brown, and 2 yellow satin bows from your shoulders rose, and that handkerchief of French lace which you held to your face. Had a small tear left a stain, or was it the rain? On your hand, as it waved adieu, there were veins of blue. In your voice, as it said goodbye, was a petulant cry. You have only wasted your life. Ah, that was the knife. When I rushed through the garden gate, it was all too late. Oh, well. If my heart must break, dear love, for your sake, it will break. In music, I know. Poets' hearts break so. But strange that I was not told that the brain could hold in a tiny ivory cell God's heaven and hell. Was it prophetic, that last verse? I often wonder. And yet, how happy even an unrequited passion made the poet in those days, when he himself was indeed the happy prince of his own fairy tale, and as if to prove his theory that only the shallow loves live on forever, he recovered with remarkable rapidity from the heart that Lily Langtry had broken, and he journeyed most cheerfully to America to lecture there on art and aesthetics. He was now 28 years of age, and having expressed a faint disapproval of the Atlantic Ocean, and announced on arrival at the New York Customs House that he had nothing at all to declare except his genius, he proceeded to give to his transatlantic audiences all they expected, and possibly a little more too. Now, here are some of his own impressions of the town of Leadville, the richest and roughest city in the world in the early 1880s. While I was lecturing at Denver, he writes, I received a message that if I went on to Leadville, as I proposed to do, the harsher spirits there would be sure to shoot me or my traveling manager. I at once wrote and told them that nothing they could possibly do to my traveling manager would intimidate me, and I went. At my lecture last night, a baby was present, and when I said there is no more beautiful way of appreciating nature than through art, the baby burst into tears. I said I wished the juvenile enthusiast there would restrain its raptures, and all was mysteriously silent once more. My audience otherwise was mainly composed of miners, whose huge, somber hats, red shirts, and high leather boots made me think of 17th century cavaliers. There they sat, rows and rows of them, enormous, powerfully built men, silent as the grave, their eyes watchful, their brawny arms folded over their muscular chests, a gun on each thigh. I spoke to these delightful fellows about the earlier Florentine schools, and they slept as peacefully as though no crime had ever stained the ravines of their wild mountain home. I described to them the pictures of Botticelli, and the name that seemed to them, I suppose, like a new drink, aroused them from their dreams. I read them certain passages from the autobiography of Benvenuto Cellini, and he proved so popular that they asked me as one man why the hell I hadn't brought him with me. I explained, of course, that Benvenuto Cellini had been dead for some years, and this elicited the immediate demand, who shot him? They then invited me to supper, and their amazement when they saw that art and appetite could go hand in hand knew no bounds. When I lit a long cigar and quaffed a couple of cocktails without flinching, they cheered me until the silver fell down in glittering dust from the roof onto our table. Incidentally, Oscar Wilde drank those miners under that very table on that very night. And indeed, it seems that he had a wonderful time all over the United States, and I think it's delightful to reflect that among the many distinguished Americans who welcomed him to their country were Walt Whitman, Mark Twain, and the authoress of Little Women and Good Wives. There. Of course, what Miss Louisa May Alcott thought of Mr. Oscar Wilde, or indeed what Oscar thought of Louisa May, history, alas, has never related. When he got back to Europe, he lived for a few months in Paris, and on his return to London, he fell in love all over again, and this time he married her, a gentle and very beautiful Irish girl called Constance Mary Lloyd. They were passionately and mutually in love and extremely happy, and at the same time, Wilde was making his first experiments in the art of the dramatist. His first two plays were what today would be briefly and brutally dismissed as flops, but quite soon he had produced a resounding success called Lady Windermere's Fan, and this, of course, it was that first set the seal of definite popularity upon an already considerable artistic reputation, and that earned for him, too, the cachet of modernity. He was regarded, indeed, by his contemporaries as the symbol of ultra-modernism, and to my mind, The modern, who also happens to be a man of genius, is not contented with merely echoing the age he lives in. He invents it. Oscar Wilde, I seriously suggest to you, invented the period we speak of today as the 1890s, through the first half of which famous decade he strutted, and through the second half of which he staggered. The strutting phase, when he was dandy of dress, dandy of speech, dandy of manner, dandy of wit, dandy even of ideas and of intellect. The period, in fact, during which he invented that curious flower forever associated with his name, the green carnation, has a characteristic moment in a little scene from his comedy An Ideal Husband, a scene which opens with Lord Goring between two London parties, explaining to his manservant Phipps the subtle influence of the buttonhole upon thought. Now, Lord Goring enters in a white tie with a rather faded flower in his coat to find that Phipps, his servant, is waiting for him. And to Phipps he says, "Got my second buttonhole for me, Phipps?" "Yes, my lord." "Ah, rather distinguished thing, Phipps. I am the only person of the smallest importance in London at present who wears a buttonhole." "Yes, my lord, I have observed that. You see, Phipps, fashion is what one wears oneself. What is unfashionable is what other people wear." "Yes, my lord. Just as vulgarity is simply the conduct of other people." "Yes, my lord. And falsehoods the truths of other people." "Yes, my lord. Other people are quite dreadful, Phipps. The only possible society is oneself." "Yes, my lord. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance, Phipps." "Yes, my lord. I don't think I quite like this buttonhole, Phipps. Makes me look a little too old. Makes me almost in the prime of life, Phipps? For the future, a more trivial buttonhole, perhaps, on Thursday evenings. I will speak to the florist, my lord. She has had a loss in her family lately, which perhaps accounts for the lack of triviality your lordship complains of in the buttonhole. Extraordinary thing about the lower classes in England. They're always losing their relations. Yes, my lord, they are extremely fortunate in that respect. Want my cab round at once?" "Thank you, Phipps, that will do." "Thank you, my lord." Phipps's views on family life seem somewhat lax. Really, if one's own servants don't set one a good moral example, what on earth is the use of them? Lord Caversham, oh my God. Now, why will one's parents always appear at the wrong time? Some extraordinary mistake in nature, I suppose. Delighted to see you, my dear father. Take my cloak off, sir. Oh, is it really worthwhile, father? Of course it is worthwhile, sir. No drafts, I hope, in this room? No drafts, father. Glad to hear that. I want to have a serious conversation with you, sir. My dear father, a serious conversation at this hour? Why, it's long after 7. And my doctor says I must not have any serious conversation after 7. It makes me talk in my sleep. Talk in your sleep, sir? Well, what does that matter? You're not married, are you? No, father, I'm not married. That is what I have come round here to talk to you about, sir. You've got to get married, you hear me? You've got to get married, and at once. Why, damn it, sir, when I was your age, I had been an inconsolable widower for 3 months. And I was already paying my addresses to your admirable mother. Damn it, sir, it's your duty to get married. Your duty, sir. You can't always be living for pleasure, you know. High time you got a wife, sir. You are 34 years of age. I know that, father, but I only admit to 32. 31 and a half when I have a really good buttonhole. This buttonhole is not quite trivial enough. I tell you, you are 34, sir. Well, what is more, there is a draft in your room, sir. I feel a draft, sir. I feel a draft distinctly. So do I, father. It's a dreadful draft. Dear father, do let me take you to another room. Your sneezes are positively heart-rending. Well, sir, I suppose I have a right to sneeze when I choose. Quite so, father. I was merely expressing sympathy. Oh, damn sympathy. There's a great deal too much of that sort of thing going on nowadays. I quite agree with you, father. If there was less sympathy in the world, there would be less trouble in the world, wouldn't there? Tell me something. Do you always understand what you are talking about, sir? Yes, father. If I listen attentively. If you listen attentively, you conceited young puppy, sir. With his growing success as a playwright and as a social figure, a new note was appearing in the personality of Oscar Wilde. One might say rather fancifully, if you like, that the joyous, splendid pagan noonday of sunflower and lily were making way for the more elaborate, artificial, vaporous afternoon of the green carnation. One of his poems, written indeed before he had invented what he called himself that magnificent flower, expresses, however, one of the most characteristic of all its moods. We caught the tread of dancing feet, we loitered down the moonlit street and stopped beneath the harlot's house. Inside, above the din and fray, we heard the loud musicians play the toyer's lieb as hearts of Strauss. Like strange mechanical grotesques making fantastic arabesques, the shadows raced across the blind. We watched the ghostly dancers spin to sound of horn and violin, like black leaves wheeling in the wind. Sometimes a clockwork puppet pressed a phantom lover to her breast. Sometimes they seemed to try to sing. Sometimes a horrible marionette came out and smoked its cigarette upon the steps like a live thing. Then, turning to my love, I said, "The dead are dancing with the dead. The dust is whirling with the dust." But she heard the violin and left my side and entered in. Love passed into the house of lust. Then suddenly the tune went false. The dancers wearied of the waltz. The shadows ceased to wheel and whirl. And down the long and silent street, the dawn, with silver-sandaled feet, crept like a frightened girl. The same curious mood found its full expression in his one novel, a work which earned for him the unanimous abuse of the critics. It was considered unwholesome, for one thing. Now, of course, unwholesome was a very favorite adjective of the period. Anything you disapproved of, you said it was unwholesome, sir, and you snorted. If, however, you happened to be the sort of person who did approve of that sort of thing, you said it was strangely exotic, and you breathed through your nose. So you see, people haven't changed at all, really. It's only things like hats and adjectives that change. Anyway, this particular work of art was indeed exotic, unwholesome, strange, and so on, and the thing played old Harry for many a long day with late Victorian susceptibilities. The painter Basil Hallward, at work in his London studio, is putting the last touches to a splendid full-length portrait of a young gentleman who is 20 years of age, who is the possessor of birth, breeding, of immense wealth, of astonishingly good looks, and who bears the name of Dorian Gray. The painter feels a certain romantic admiration for his sitter, and entirely against his own better judgment, he introduces the boy one exquisite day in summer to a devil about town called Lord Henry Wotton. Now, Lord Henry Wotton is simply Mephistopheles in Faust. That's who Lord Henry Wotton is, plain as a pikestaff, and the moment he sets eyes on Dorian Gray, he proceeds to pour into the lad's youthful and so far unspoiled ears his own peculiar philosophy of life. This briefly is that youth and pleasure and beauty, however bitterly fleeting, are the only things in the world worth a damn, and that the best way to enjoy them to the full is by draining every cup that life can offer to the dregs. Dorian, timidly but apparently unhesitatingly, becomes a convert, and when Hallward's portrait of him is finished and he, standing in front of it for the first time, realizes how amazingly young and how ridiculously handsome he is, he utters a prayer. And he prays that the picture may grow old and bear the burden of his deeds and days, and that he himself may remain forever young. Oscar Wilde once said, "When the gods wish to punish us, they answer our prayers." And this, of course, is what happens to the hero of the novel. His prayer is answered, the miracle happens, the picture begins to change, subtly, horribly. And Dorian Gray, terrified by the alteration that is creeping over the painted canvas, has the thing hidden away in an attic at the top of his house in Grosvenor Square, an attic to which he alone holds the key. And then, largely under the influence of an evil but fascinating book, French, of course, given him by Lord Henry Wotton, of course, Dorian Gray begins to lead a life of the most reprehensible, though on the whole unspecified pleasures. He burns, indeed, continually with what Walter Pater might have called, though he didn't actually, a soft, gem-like flame, passing from pleasure to dubious pleasure, and from one strange-coloured vice to another. And yet, in spite of the passing of the years and of the really dreadful life that he's leading, Dorian Gray continues to look like a blameless young Narcissus. The same, alas, cannot be said of the picture which, all alone in its locked-up attic, with an occasional visit from Dorian to see how it's getting along, grows older and more hideous, depraved, lecherous, bloated, sinister, horrifying. Well, 18 baroque years go by in this fashion, and the innocent cause of all the trouble, poor old Basil Hallward, who did paint the fatal picture, is troubled by Dorian's evil reputation and by the persistent rumours in London about his mode of life. So troubled, indeed, is the good Basil Hallward that one ominous, foggy November night he calls on Dorian Gray in Grosvenor Square, and he asks him point blank, is there any truth at all in these hideous things that people are saying about him everywhere? Dorian is furious with Hallward. He is incensed by what he considers an impertinent cross-examination, even from an old friend. And quite suddenly he says, very well, Basil, as you seem so concerned about my life, I think you might as well know everything. Come with me, yes? Come upstairs. I keep a diary of my life from day to day, and it never leaves the room in which it is written. Come with me, Basil. You've chattered long enough tonight about corruption. Well, now you can look on corruption face to face. And he takes up a lamp and guides the bewildered Hallward up the stairs. The two men enter the attic together, and Hallward sees to his astonishment that he is in a barely furnished room, dim with dust and cobwebs, and facing him on the wall is a full-length portrait of a stooping, elderly man with the face of a satyr. Slowly he understands it is the picture of Dorian Gray which he himself had painted more than 18 years ago. And overcome by horror and bewilderment, he reproaches his friend more bitterly than ever, and Dorian, in a sudden fit of passion and hatred, takes up a knife and, rushing at Hallward, he dug the knife into the great vein that is behind the ear, crushing the man's head down on the table and stabbing him again and again. There was the horrible sound of someone choking with blood. 3 times the outstretched arm shot up convulsively. He stabbed him twice more. But now the man did not move. He was dead. And yet, had it not been for that red, jagged tear in his neck and the clotted black pool that was slowly widening on the table, one would have said that he was simply asleep. How quickly it had all been done. Dorian Gray felt strangely calm, and walking over to the window, he opened it and stepped out onto the balcony. Oh, the air! The wind had blown the fog away, and the night sky was like a monstrous peacock's tail, starred with myriads of golden eyes. He looked down and saw a policeman going his rounds, flashing the long beam of his lantern on the doors of the silent houses. The crimson spot of a prowling hansom gleamed at the corner and then vanished. A woman in a fluttering shawl was creeping slowly by the railing, staggering as she went. Now and then she would stop and peer back into the darkness. Once she began to sing in a hoarse voice. The policeman strolled over and said something to her. She stumbled away, laughing. A bitter blast of wind swept across the square. The gas lamps flickered and became blue, and the leafless trees shook their black iron branches to and fro. He shivered and went back, closing the window behind him. The dead thing was still seated in the chair, half sprawling over the table. Basil Hallward. He was nothing now but a dreadful wax image. His eye fell on the picture. Oh, what was that crimson dew that spotted the right hand? Blood oozing from the painted canvas. He turned away and leaned his forehead against the cold, mist-stained glass of the window pane. Then, for some reason, he pulled out his watch. It was 20 minutes to 2, and Dorian Gray began to think. To think.